This conference will now be recorded.
Hi everyone. In today's session, we are going to talk about introduction to Selenium. So let's go on with the orientation, whatever we have targeted for today. So we'll be talking about the first thing about introduction to the trainer, about myself, and then we will move it on for talking about today's session, like introduction to automation testing, and then we will move it on for discussing on introduction to Selenium automation tool. So let me introduce myself. I am Ashok Reddy, having 15 plus years of IT industry experience, and I am still working professional, and I'm working as an automation architect in one of the leading MNC in India. And apart from 15 plus years of experience, I also have 6 plus years of online training experience. So overall, it comes with the 20 plus years of experience to my career. So that's a just brief about myself. And let's start with today's session, Introduction to Automation Testing. So before talking about introduction to automation testing, let's try to understand what is exactly the automation testing. So automation is the process of using a program to execute user transactions against the system. So let me explain you about the sentence, whatever I have just mentioned. So automation is the process of using a program to execute user transactions. So let's take an example. So whatever the manual testing you guys are doing so far, and you would like to go for automating it. So like it's talk about user transactions here. So user transactions, what we are talking about is nothing but your test case steps. So every test case will have couple of test steps, and a tester will manually look at the each and every test case and goes on for executing that particular each step and validate the expected results manually. So what we are trying to do in automation testing is, like, we take the test case which typically goes through the step by step along with the test data and the expected result, and then we go for automating those manual test steps using any of the automation tool with any of the programming language. So when I'm talking about any of the programming language, it would be typically, talking about the programming language is, again, depending on the automation tool that we are going to use. So like, say, if you guys are using the QTP as a functional automation testing tool, so you guys will be using the VB scripting or the Java scripting. So if you go for, Selenium is not dependent on one language. You will always have multiple languages, which we are going to talk about in the coming slides. So when we talk about automation, there are always two things. One is automation tool, and another one is the programming language that we wanted to use it. So every automation tool will have its own programming language, which we are forced to use that specific language based on the automation tool that you're trying to use. As just given an example, if you guys are going to use the QTP, you're forced to use the VB scripting most of the time. So when it comes to types of automation testing, so typically there are two types of functional automation testing. One as functional automation testing, and the second one is non-functional automation testing. So when we talk about the functional automation testing, as the name says, the functional automation, when we say functional, what are we trying to test in functional testing? We are trying to validate the system whether it's functioning as expected or not, right? So if I give an example, if user enters the user ID and password in login page, user's inbox should be appear. Let's say that user is trying to log in into the Gmail. So if user enters the user ID and password, like say I'm entering my user ID as Ashok and Ashok's password, and then when I click on login, I should be shown with Ashok's inbox. So that's a functionality what we are trying to validate, right? So typically in functional automation testing, what we are trying to do, we are trying to automate the manual test cases to test the functionality of the system is working as expected by using any of the functional automation tools. So As said, we take the manual test cases, we take this every test step from each test case, and we try to automate and make sure that the system is working as expected. Okay. So there are so many tools available in the market for functional automation testing tool. I have just listed out the few of the tools here, like you have a QTP, Silk Test, Selenium, VSTS, etc. So there are so many companies having their own products for functional automation testing. Like QTP is coming from HP. If you take Selenium is coming from ThoughtWorks, and VSTS is coming from the Microsoft. So it's up to you guys which functional automation tool that you guys are going to learn and which functional automation tool that you are going to use it in your project. So majority of the time, regression, smoke, and build test cases are going to be automated. We will talk about in detail about this, what we are going to automate and why we have to go for automation in the next slide. So when it comes to non-functional automation, as the name says, non-functional, here we are not trying to test the functionality of the system. Rather than the functionality, we are trying to test the performance of the system. If you guys have some knowledge on the performance testing, so non-functional testing is nothing but the performance testing. So we are trying to test the performance of the application, how it is behaving. So we always do functional testing first, and then we go for non-functional automation testing to make sure the performance of the system. So typically, if I give an example, same example, if I give user wanted to log in into Gmail, user enters the user ID and the password, showing the inbox of the logged in user, I just said Ashok, and showing Ashok's inbox is the functionality of the system, right? And if you look at non-functional testing, which typically known as performance testing, how soon the system is showing the inbox of the user, Ashok's inbox. So is it taking too much time, or it's just like that, it is showing in fraction of seconds? So that's what exactly we are trying to validate, the response time of the system, how much time it is taking to respond to the user when the particular transaction is performed on the specific load. So even for non-functional automation testing, there are so many tools that are available in the market from different companies. Like you know, we have you know load runner, VSTS, Silk Performer, JMeter, etc. So there are so many tools available in the market even for the non-functional automation testing as well, right? So when you wanted to choose your career into the automation testing, either you can go for functional automation testing, or you guys can go for non-functional automation testing, which typically known as performance testing. So based on the career that you guys are choosing for automation, you can go for functional. When you go for functional automation, again, you have to choose which functional automation tool that you guys wanted to learn it on, right? So let's move it on for the next slide. Why and when should I go for automation testing? So when I say why should I go for automation testing, to save the time and to save the money. So these two are, relevant to each other. When I say to save the time, when you guys are saving the time, it's nothing but you are saving the money as well. So what do you mean by you are saving the time by doing the automation testing? So let me give one example. Let's say that I assume you guys also know about the regression testing, which I'm going to talk about. If you guys are not aware about the regression testing, that's fine. I can show you my blog. You guys can go ahead and refer what exactly the regression testing, which is clearly described in detail in my blog. So let's say that there are 200 manual test cases which are marked as a regression testing, which has to be executed for every release that is coming into the testing, right? So let's say that I got one release today, and I have to execute 200 regression test cases. So I have every month one release. For every 1 month, I have to execute these 200 regression test cases to make sure that the system is not caused any new defects to the existing system, right? So let's say I have two resources who are dedicatedly working on my regression testing to execute the 200 test cases for every release. So considering 8 working hours for the resource, whoever is working on, so 2 resources, it would be, it would be 16 hours per day. Let's say that it takes 15 hours, 16 hours per day for the resource to execute, right? So let's calculate for one resource, if it is taking 8 hours per day and 2 resources, it would be taking 16 hours. It would be taking 16 hours per day into how many? I said, let's say 2 weeks, like say 10 days. So it would be, 160 hours total efforts what the 2 resources are putting to execute the regression testing. And let's say I'm charging to the client per hour $50, right? So how many dollars client is paying for regression testing for 2 weeks, which is nothing but 10 working days, $8,000 what the client is getting paid. So you're charging $8,000 to the client for 160 hours for 2 resources, which is nothing but 10 working days of it. Now let's say that I have automated those 200 test cases, which typically there were 2 resources working manually. Let's say that I have automated all the 200 test cases by looking at the manual test step. Now, once I automate it, I can just go ahead and click on run button. Once I click on run button, it would not even take, you know, it would not even take 2 to 3 hours, let's say not more than 4 hours. So let's say it would not even take 4 hours of time for executing the 200 test cases. Now you guys can assume the efforts, how many hours you were putting was 160 hours, which were charged to the client as $8,000 for 10 days of time. Now what you guys are doing, you are managing the executing of 200 test cases, and you're just doing it in 4 hours of time. So you guys can imagine you won't be charging anything to the event client, because while I'm leaving from the office, I'll just click on run button. I just go home. And when I reach to office on the next day, I obviously see that the reports are ready, whatever is executed. So you will be not charging anything to the client. So client will be saving 8,000. I mean, you are saving to the client $8,000, right? Which you guys were charging 8,000 earlier. Now, when it comes to reusable, the second feature, why should I go for automation? It's a reusable. So when I say reusable, as I mentioned in this example, for every release, I have to make sure I have to execute these 200 test cases every release to make sure the system is not broken, right, of the existing system because of the new code that we are getting added. So I can go ahead and reuse the same thing every release. Let's say I said every month I have a release. So every month you can go on and execute the same 200 test cases which are reusable. So for every month you are saving $8,000 to the client. On average, if you take how many dollars you are saving to the client is per year, 96,000 96K dollars what you guys are saving to the clients, almost all 100K dollars what you guys are 96K dollars what you guys are saving to the client. So which is again reusable. Whenever you want to just click on run and make sure you tested those 200 test cases and report is ready for you. And another feature, why should I go, is like it's an error prone human behavior, and it also, by doing the automation, it also improves the accuracy as well. So these are the reasons why I should go for why I should go for using the automation testing, right? And when should I go for the automation testing? Wherever you guys see there is a scope for, wherever you guys see there is a scope for the regression testing, and you guys have to definitely consider the automation testing wherever you see the regression testing. Nowadays, entire market in IT industry is running in agile. So when I talk about the agile, so you go on sprint wise. So every sprint you guys will always have the changes that are coming in. So sprint 1, then go to sprint 2, then go to sprint 3. When I'm in sprint 3, I need to make sure that sprint 2 and sprint 1 are still working. So I cannot go and test manually every time. So it has become mandatory skill in IT industry to have automation as part of your agile, right? It has become one of the software testing lifecycle is nothing but automation is being added. One of the automation software testing tool, software testing lifecycle is one of the part nowadays. So when again I can go for automation is like when application is stable, I cannot go and start automating the system or application on the day one. So typically, when we get a first release or build, we'll have a couple of issues. It takes some time for environment to set up, and it should be stable. So when you guys see that the application is stable, and then you guys can go for automating the your application. So also when you can go for automation is like when no frequent changes to the system, there should not be so frequent changes to the system where you have to again rework on enhancing your script to cover the whatever changes that are being is happening here, right? So you guys can even consider automation when to go, like when you testing, when application is stable, and when no frequent changes to the system. So these are the reasons why and when to go for automation testing. So it has, as said, it has become mandatory in IT industry now to learn the automation testing, and it has also become one of the part in software testing lifecycle, which was not the case earlier. So let's move on to the understanding introduction to the Selenium. So introduction to the Selenium. Selenium is an open source. Selenium is an open source tool basically. So when I say open source, which is nothing but you guys can go ahead and download it on free of cost. Just go to Google and click on download Selenium. You guys can just go ahead and download it on free of cost. So which you don't have to pay anything for downloading or licensing cost for the Selenium. So Selenium supports only web-based applications. What do you mean by only web-based applications? Which is nothing but so uh, any application that is working in on the browser, you guys can go for automating those applications using the Selenium. Any product application that's run through the browser, you guys can consider Selenium can be used for automating those um, functional automation testing. So Selenium also supports many operating systems, and as well as Selenium also supports multiple programming languages. So when we talk about the compatibility testing, so basically nowadays the most of the users are using the mobile devices. Someone is using Android, someone is using iOS, someone is using Mac operating system, someone is using tablet, someone is using mobile device. So it has become mandatory from the testing aspect of you to make sure that the application is perfectly working fine in all of these operating systems, and as well as in the different browsers, and as well as in the different you know uh, handsets as well, like mobile device or the tablet. So Selenium supports many operating systems, and as well as it supports multiple browsers. I just listed out a few operating system. It doesn't mean that, I mean, operating systems and as well as the browsers. It doesn't mean that it supports only this. It's the Selenium is going to support almost all the operating systems, whatever uh, we have in the market, right? So you guys can go for using Mozilla Firefox, Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, Opera, whatever the operating system listed out, you guys can list it out here. You guys can go ahead and use them as well. So when it comes to the language supported by Selenium, so the beauty of the Selenium is like it's not like other functional automation tools when I compare it. So it doesn't force you to stick to only one programming language. whoever is forced to use, like if I take an QTP, you are forced to go for using only VB scripting, right? So, but when it comes to the Selenium, you have multiple programming languages. Like Selenium supports these 6 programming languages: Java, C Sharp, Ruby, Python, PHP, and Perl. So whatever you guys are seeing it here under programming languages, so these all are nothing but the programming languages which can be used as part of your Selenium. So if you guys know C Sharp, so I would say you can easily manage Selenium with the C Sharp because you're already familiarized with the C Sharp, right? So one of the unique feature of the Selenium is like multiple languages and multiple operating system and multiple browsers what it's going to support on free of cost. As I said, it's an open source tool, right? So maybe you guys might get a question like, my application is developed in C Sharp. Can I go for automating that application using Selenium with the Java? Answer is yes. So there is no dependency on the programming language that you guys are using in to automate your application, and the programming language or technology that is used for developing your application. There is no restriction on at all. Okay, you are forced to, I mean, you're free to go for using any of the programming language. You are not forced to use only specific language like other tools are forcing to use it. Okay, so let's move it on understanding the Selenium components of the Selenium. So components of the Selenium is nothing but there are 4 components in the Selenium. So one is Selenium IDE, Selenium RC, WebDriver, and Selenium Grid. So these are the different components what the Selenium is basically having in. So there are 4 components what they have in the Selenium, right? So let's try to understand each one of the component in detail as a brief. So Selenium IDE is nothing but integrated development environment. So it's just nothing but it's a add-on plugged into the Mozilla Firefox and as well as to the Chrome. So what are the major features of IDE is nothing but it's easy to record, right? And playback. So what do you mean by record and playback? So as I was mentioning, when we try to automate, we basically take the manual test case and we follow the steps that are given in the test case. And now let's say that my test case talks about login into Gmail account and verify logged in user inbox is displayed. So I'm going to perform, these are the different steps that what I'm trying to do. Like I have to open the browser, type the URL gmail.com, and then click on sign in, and then enter user ID, and then enter the password, then click on login, then verify users inbox is displayed. So these are the different transactions. I would say these are the different steps what I'm performing in can be recorded using the IDE. So just click on record and start doing your you know actions or transactions what you wanted to perform. So IDE is going to record each and every action that you guys are performing on your browser. So once you say recording is done, you guys can go ahead and stop recording, and you guys can go click on play recording. So once I click on play recording, so what it's typically going to do is it's going to perform the same actions that you guys are did, like clicks on sign in button, enters the user ID, enters the password, and clicks on login, and then it validates whether user's inbox is displayed or not, right? That's what exactly I mean to say record and playback. So Selenium IDE also identifies objects under test. AUT is nothing but objects under test using object ID, names, XPath as needed. So maybe we can talk it about in detail. What do you mean by ID, name, XPath in the coming session? So basically, you have to identify a web element property using which you have to perform the action. So IDE allows you to perform of identification of your web element properties using all the things like ID, name, XPath, or CSS text, etc. So the another feature is autocomplete for all common Selenium commands. Like whenever I'm trying to type in something, so like say I would like to click, I wanted to use a command called click. So when I just type in CL, it automatically completes as a click. It auto populates the commands that you guys are basically trying to type in. So IDE also allows you to debug and set the breakpoints to understand where the test case is failing and debug it and take it further why it is getting failed, right? And as said, whenever we guys are recording the actions that we guys are performing, Selenium automatically generates a code on its own. So whenever we are recording an actions, IDE is going to write its own code on itself where we are not writing any coding in IDE. It automatically generates a code on its own, and that code would be in the programming language called HTML. So it generates the code in the language called HTML format. So automatically, whenever you save the your test case, it automatically saves in the HTML format. So I repeat again, when you guys are performing some actions on the application, it auto generates the code, which means it writes the code on its own, and then it's going to write the code in a language called HTML. And the last another feature is IDE allows to export test suite or test case to different language like Java, C Sharp, or Ruby. So what I'm trying to mention is like I said, IDE is going to write the code on its own in a language called HTML. If you wanted to export this test case into another programming language to Java, IDE also has that feature where you guys can go ahead and export that HTML into a Java coding. The IDE also has that particular feature. So the major drawbacks of IDE, what I'm talking about is, as said, it is nothing but a add-on plug into the Firefox, and initially it was introduced only to the Firefox, but later it came even to the Chrome browser. So you're forced to use Firefox or the Chrome browsers if you guys wanted to go for using the IDE component. And the second drawback is it will not allow to use the conditions and loops. So whenever we try to automate the test cases, we have to validate the expected result and the actual result. In order to do that, we need to write the conditions. Or maybe in some other cases also, we need to write a programming for automation where we guys have to, you know, use the conditions to compare actual result and expected result. So IDE does not allow basically to write a coding like if else conditions or whatever the loops like while or for loop or do while loops. If you guys wanted to use them, IDE does not allow because it's using the HTML programming language, where HTML itself does not have an option to write these things. So another drawback is if you wanted to read the test data from external files like Excel or .txt or .csv file, you cannot go for using the IDE. So these are the major drawbacks what we have with respect to the IDE that is being introduced as the first component in the Selenium component. Now, we just briefly looked at the Selenium IDE and we understand what are the features of IDE and as well as the drawbacks of the IDE. Now, let's move on, try to understand another component called Selenium RC. RC is nothing but a remote control. Now, if you guys remember, the drawbacks of IDE are nothing but features of RC, as simple as. If you guys know the drawbacks of IDE, these are nothing but features of Selenium RC, remote control. So they created a component called IDE, has a couple of drawbacks. They wanted to come out of these drawbacks, and that's where they introduced another component called remote control. So remote control is a tool that allows you to automate web application tests in any programming language So now I'm talking about any programming language. So when I'm talking about any programming language, typically the languages which are listed out here. So when I say any programming language out of these six, so whereas IDE does not allow to use except the HTML. So RT has removed the drawback, and they said go ahead and use any of the six programming language which are listed out, right? Okay, programming language against any website using any mainstream JavaScripting enabled browser. So what do you mean by JavaScript enabled browser? So let's try to understand the architecture of RC. Then we will go through this sentence, whatever is listed out, which makes easier to understand. Now let's say that I have a test case to automate, again, like login into the application where I have to enter the user ID, password, then click on sign in. So let's say that this is the coding what I have. So whatever you guys are seeing it here, let's say this is what my code what I have it here. Let's say this code is written in Python language, right? I use Selenium tool and I used Python as a programming language in order to automate my login test case, right? So now I wanted to execute my login test case, which is being automated using the programming language called Python. If I have to execute, let's say these three things that you guys are seeing application under test, one is running in IE, one is running in Firefox browser, and another one is running in another browser type. Now let's say that I wanted to execute it, so I will just go ahead and click on run from my code. So when I click on run, my script is going to start executing the coding whatever I have written. So this is your coding and this is your application where it is running in your browser, right? And in between your code and between your application, there is something component called remote control server. That's what exactly RC we are talking about it. So your code, whatever you guys have written in Python, is not directly interacting with your application. So then what it is exactly doing? So when you click on run, it comes to the remote control server. So what remote control server is trying to do, it takes every line of the code that is written in the Python and it converts that programming language from Python to JavaScripting. So when it comes to remote control server, each line of code is being taken, which is written in Python, and each line of the code is going to be converted into a language called JavaScripting. Then the remote control server is going to inject that JavaScripting commands into your application to enter the user ID and then convert one more line of the code to enter your password, convert that into JavaScripting, and then again take one more line of the code which clicks on the sign in, and then it just goes on converting everything, and then it keeps performing the actions on your application. So what is happening here, so it doesn't matter which programming language that you guys have used, for uh, automating your test case. When you click on run, remote control server is automatically converting into the JavaScripting and then it is executing. So your script is not directly interacting with your application. That's the first drawback. And the second drawback, every line of the code that is written in the language, whatever example you have taken is Python, should be converted into the JavaScripting. So every line of the code should be converted into JavaScripting. Conversion takes a lot of time as well. So every line of the code it has to convert and then inject into your application to perform the action. So what I'm trying to say is conversion also takes time when you guys are executing your test case. It takes more than the expected time because every line of the code has to be converted. So that's the second drawback what we have. And the third drawback, I said JavaScript enabled. So what do you mean by JavaScript enabled browser? So for every browser, there is an option to disable the JavaScripting. So if you guys are working for the banking applications, Due to security reasons, clients may insist you guys to, clients may insist you guys to disable the JavaScripting due to security reasons. So if you guys are disabling the JavaScripting in your browser based on the client request, your scripts, whatever you guys have automated, cannot be executed because it uses the mainstream called JavaScripting programming language. So JavaScripting itself is disabled in your browser. You guys cannot go and run your scripts that are being test cases that are being automated. Now, if I read this sentence which I have written here, makes much easier for you guys to understand. Now, it injects JavaScript functions into the browser when the browser was loaded and then used its JavaScript to drive the application under test within the browser. So what I mean to say, now I have written in a Python, when it comes to remote control server, when the browser loads, it converts into the JavaScripting and then it injects the JavaScripting into your application, right? So, and it requires to have remote control server as a middleman to pass your commands to your browser. So there should be a middleman which is called remote control server, which typically passes your JavaScripting commands here. So these are the major drawbacks with the RC. Now let's go with first component IDE. We understood it, and there are a couple of drawbacks. They removed all these drawbacks of IDE, and they have introduced one more component called Selenium RC, and RC is also being having its own drawbacks. Now let's try to understand the WebDriver. Now, if you guys remember, the drawbacks of IDE is nothing but features of RC. If you guys remember, the drawbacks of RC are nothing but features of your WebDriver. That's it. Now, if I take the architecture of the WebDriver, if you remove this remote control server, if you guys remove this remote control server, it's typically nothing but your architecture of the WebDriver. Let's try to understand the WebDriver in brief. So WebDriver is nothing but the core component of the Selenium. If you guys are going to learn the Selenium, so sorry, before going to the WebDriver, so RC is purely deprecated. So RC, no one is going to use RC in the market. So the company whoever is developed this product, they already announced that the RC is being deprecated. So what do you mean by a deprecated? So deprecated means the company is no more is going to work on this particular product, so it stopped there. So RC does not support Android operating system, and also it does not support iOS operating systems, and RC also does not support all the browsers, and as well as RC does not support the latest versions of the browser. So if you're trying to use RC with the Microsoft Edge, RC is not going to support because RC is a product that is being deprecated. So the company stopped working on RC, so they say that do not go for using it. So when I say deprecated, it is strongly recommended not to use that particular product which is announced as a RC. So you guys can simply ignore the RC. It has nothing to do that you guys have to learn nowadays. So when it comes to the WebDriver, so WebDriver is the core component of the system, as I was mentioning. So if you guys are going to learn the Selenium, you will be spending 80% to 90% of your time on the WebDriver. So it's a core of the Selenium component. So WebDriver is more object oriented compared to RC, and it supports all the browsers with the latest versions. As said, RC is not going to support all the browsers and as well as with the latest version since it's a deprecated. When it comes to the WebDriver, so WebDriver is the component they are keep on enhancing this product so that it supports the latest versions of the browsers and as well as the different browsers that are coming newly into the market. And WebDriver supports Android and iOS operating system as well, like where RC is not going to support these two operating systems. So WebDriver directly interacts with the application under test. Now, as said, if you guys remove this remote control server as a middleman, nothing but it's architecture of your WebDriver. Your script is directly interacting with your application. There is no conversion, there is no JavaScripting enable or disable. It has nothing to do. Directly interact with your browser. So it's faster than RC as no conversion takes place. So as said, there's no conversion in place when it comes to the WebDriver. So it would be faster than the remote control server. So the last one is no dependency on the JavaScript enable like RC. It's not that you guys can go ahead and disable JavaScripting in your browser. Still, you guys can go ahead and execute your automated test cases, and there is no dependency that the JavaScripting to be enabled on your browser. So I repeat again, if you guys are going to learn the Selenium, the WebDriver is going to be the core component which you guys are going to spend more time on learning the WebDriver. So we went through the three components like IDE, RC, and the WebDriver. Now let me take you back on introduction to the Selenium slide. So why I'm taking to this slide is about, now I was mentioning Selenium supports, multiple browsers, and as well as Selenium supports multiple operating systems. In simple terminology, we say that compatibility testing. So now I wanted to execute the same test case, which I mentioned login. I wanted to execute it in Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox. And when it comes to operating systems, I wanted to execute it in iOS and as well as Android and as well as in the Windows. So you are making sure that the login functionality is working fine in all these combinations, different browsers, different operating systems, in different devices. So how it is possible is using the Selenium Grid. So Grid is the component which basically allows you guys to go ahead and perform the compatibility testing. So that's what exactly the grid we are talking about. So grid, let's try to understand. The grid basically works hub and node. So grid will always have two things. One is called hub and another thing called as the node. So hub is nothing but my laptop or my desktop or my machine where I have code is written. Let's say that I automated a test case which is called for login functionality of the application where I have written my coding that is there in my laptop. So that is called as a hub. Hub is nothing but too simple for you guys to understand is nothing but it is just a machine where your automation code exists. So what is the node then? So node is nothing but it's in a different device, or it can be a different laptop, or it can be a different desktop, or it can be a separate virtual machine, right? So what we are trying to do with respect to the node, now let's say that the client wanted to test my application in Android, Windows XP, right? And like say that I wanted to test it, client wanted to test it on Mac operating system also, and also UBNTV, another operating system what we have. So client wanted to test it in different operating system. One is Android, one is Windows XP, one is Mac, and another one is UBNTV operating system. So these are the four operating systems in which client wanted to test it. So I cannot install all these operating systems in one laptop or in one machine, right? So for every operating system, in this example, I have four operating system. So I'm just going to install, I'm just going to install four different nodes. Each node one has each operating system. If you look at here, the node one is Android, it's a mobile device. Node two is Windows XP, it's a kind of laptop. And I have node three UNT operating system, which is my the laptop, and node 4 is again mobile device which is having the Mac operating system. Now as said, hub is the place where you guys have a code. There should be only one hub. You cannot have more than one hub. And when it comes to the node, you guys can have n number of nodes. There is no restriction on it, right? And now, like say I click on run on my laptop in the hub. When I click on run, like I said, the Gmail login application, open the browser, type the application URL, gmail.com, then click on sign in, then enter the user ID, then enter the password, then click on login. So these are the different steps which I have automated, and I have written coding for that automation. When I click on run, all these node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4 are going to perform the same task. It goes to Android operating system in the mobile device, it opens the browser, and again it goes to Windows 2 and it opens the um, uh, Windows, under Windows XP, it opens the browser. It goes on Node 3 and Node 4. In everywhere, it opens the different browsers. And then the second step, it clicks on sign in. Every action, transaction that you automated, every step you guys have automated, all the steps are going to be executed at the same time in the different nodes to make sure that the system is really working fine and compatible in different browsers and the operating systems in the different devices. That's what exactly the main purpose of the grid. And that's the major purpose of the using the Selenium grid. And grid also can be used to run the test cases in parallelly, that we will discuss in detail when we come to topic about the grid. So these are the major four components of the Selenium. So what we went through each one of them in just brief. So now I have a blog which is called techtrainersonline.com/blog. You guys can go ahead and visit this blog for more information, and it also has a lot of detailed information for Selenium and as well as for the manual testing. So we are starting the batch in this week. If you guys are interested, you guys can go ahead and you know you guys can enroll in my website techtrainersonline.com so that we can take it further. Thank you guys. Bye for now.